Good. And the first talk is by Xaver on do you even lift strengthening compiler security guarantees against Spectre attacks? That would like less of those, so let's see how it goes.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. My name is Xaver Fabian, and this is joint work with my collaborators Marco Guarnieri, Marco Patrignani, and Michael Backes. So first, let's talk a little bit about what the Spectre attack is. Spectre attacks exploit speculative execution to leak confidential information. And speculative execution is a feature of modern processors to speed up the execution time of programs. Generally, it predicts the outcome of certain decisions, like for example branches, and speculatively executes code. If the prediction is correct, we gain a speed up and everything is good. But if the prediction was wrong, we need to roll back the architectural state of the program. However, the microarchitectural state, which includes the buffers that the processor uses, are not rolled back. Thus, there's an actual footprint of the speculative execution which the attacker can observe in the caches. Let us look at a small example. Here we have this little code snippet where we have a bounce check on this array A for a specific index. Now suppose your index is bigger than the size of the array A, and your processor now mispredicts the branch and still continues executions in line 2 and 3. Line 2, we have an out-of-bounds access, which can contain secret information, which is then stored in this Y variable. And in line 3, we leak this variable inside the cache of the processor via the access into the array B. Thus, this line 3 is a footprint the attacker can observe from the speculative execution and thus gains secret information. So in general, Spectre circumvents many well-established secure programming paradigms, and different versions target different facets of speculative execution or different predictors. For example, there's prediction on conditional jumps, indirect jump predictions, return predictions, and etc. And there are new attacks found to this day. Now, of course, people developed countermeasures targeting the different variants which are implemented as compiler countermeasures or compiler passes, and also implemented in mainstream compilers. Here we use the square brackets to indicate a compiler for the symbol, and the superscript is used to indicate which countermeasure we are looking at. And the subscript is used to indicate which specific Spectre version is targeted by this countermeasure. Furthermore, we use this little goes with a subscript, again like this SLS or J, to indicate the semantics for this kind of speculative execution. Okay, now let us put everything together what we already have. So in the bottom row, we have like the semantics of a processor which only has the non-speculative execution. And in the row above, we have the different kinds of hardware with specific speculative execution enabled, leading to the different kinds of Spectre attacks. We can also see that those compiler countermeasures are at this level as well, each targeting a specific variant of Spectre. So are we done? Well, the amount of white space I have on the slide indicates not. So what's the problem? Well, the processor uses all these prediction mechanisms actually at the same time. It does not use only branch prediction or indirect jump prediction. It uses both of them. So it uses a combination of those prediction mechanisms. Thus, our picture looks more like this. We get this lattice of the different kinds of combinations or different facets of speculative execution. And there are lots of combinations. And our problem right now is that our compilers are at this bottom row, and their guarantees are at the bottom row. So this leads us to our main question. How can we lift the security guarantees of those compilers to those stronger attackers higher in the lattice? Now, before we can really talk about this lifting process, we need to look at the interactions of the two source semantics x and y when combined, or combined semantics x plus y. And here we use traces to capture the observations the attacker can make during the execution of the program. This includes load and store observations, but also the program counter. Furthermore, we are interested in leaks that happen during speculative execution. So we add this little start observation here with the subscript X to declare that this speculative execution or speculative transaction was started because of the X semantics of the combination. And then we can see some observations tau, like those store and load observations. Next, what could happen is that in this combined semantics, a second speculative transaction could be started, nested inside the outer one. And here, this time, we have a speculation of the Y semantics. And then we can see some actions tau prime that are happening inside this nested speculative transaction. And then we mark with this RLB observation, which is a rollback, that the speculative transaction is terminated. And then we can see the rest of the trace, just some further observations. And then we have this rollback observation for the outermost speculative transaction for this X part. Now, of course, we can swap the order of the speculative transactions. So we can have this start Y outside of it and then nest inside it nested with this X semantics. So these are the general shapes of the speculative traces for those combined attackers. And now we need to ensure that these actions on these traces are safe or secure. And first, we can divide this problem into 3 sub-problems or 3 regions in the trace. The first challenge is the red area, which is the transaction of X. The second challenge is about the speculative transaction of Y. And the third challenge is the nesting of those speculative transactions. And for each of these regions, we now need to ensure that the observations are safe or secure. So let us go through these challenges one by one. Now for the first challenge. First, let us get some definitions out of the way. We say a program P is secure under the speculative semantics X if it does not speculatively leak more information than the non-speculative execution. And we say a compiler is security preserving for semantics X if for all programs that are secure under the non-speculative semantics, they remain secure when compiled even under the speculative semantics X. Stated differently, this property of the compiler ensures that the countermeasure, here this countermeasure against the semantics X, really works. And for the remainder of the talk, when we see a compiler with only the square brackets, we assume it is a compiler countermeasure against the Spectre variant X. Okay, now for the second challenge. We want to combine different Spectre versions, and we need to ensure that these interacts nicely with the compiler countermeasure. We call this property independence and extension. Note here again that this is a compiler for X, right? And we state something here with this independent for this version Y. And that is the key difference to the security preservation statement that we have seen before. So what does it say? If this program is secure for the extension semantics Y, then the compiled program should still be secure for the extension semantics Y. This means that there are no unsafe interactions between the compiler countermeasure and the extension semantics Y. This means the compiler does not introduce new leaks under the extension semantics. Now for the third challenge. Here, we require a proof that all observations made in those nested speculative transactions are safe. We call this safe nesting. And we will see later how we can actually achieve this. Okay, with this out of the way, we need to actually talk about what we want to lift. What is the security property of the compiler we want to lift to the stronger attackers? For example, we could try to use our security preservation property from before, that I've stated here again. However, this is actually too strict for our use case. The compiler countermeasures were developed with a specific speculation mechanism in mind to protect against. It never was a goal to protect against other, possibly at this point of time, unknown Spectre variants. Now, when we want to lift the security guarantees to a semantics that accounts for additional speculation mechanisms, the compiled program might still contain some leaks that the compiler was not designed to prevent in the first place, i.e., for example, leaks caused only by the additional mechanism Y we combine with, which is our compiler is not supposed to protect against. So the problem here is that our security property cannot differentiate between the two components of the combined attacker. We lose the information from where the attack is coming from. And that is why we propose a new criterion called conditionally security preserving. First note that we now have the two components of the combined semantics in the statement that we want to combine. This allows us to differentiate from where the leak is coming from, solving our problem. Next, we have this additional premise that we assume that this program is secure for the extension semantics. So then we can conclude that this compiled program will be secure under the combined semantics. So in general, conditional security preservation is a variant of security preservation that restricts the preservation only to those programs that do not contain leaks caused only by the additional mechanism. Okay, now we can state our main lifting theorem using these three building blocks. If our compiler is security preserving for X, so the compiler countermeasure really works, it is independent for the extension semantics Y, so it does not produce new leaks for that semantics, and fulfills this safe nesting condition, then we can say that this compiler is conditionally security preserving for those two semantics. Okay, now let us look at how we can apply our lifting theorem on compilers. So here's an example for this fence compiler targeting straight line speculation. In the beginning, we show that this compiler is security preserving for the single variant. This means that the compiler countermeasure actually works. Next, by proving independence and safe nesting, we are able to lift the security guarantees higher up in the lattice. We show that the compiler is conditionally security preserving for these next variants. And we can repeat this process again and again until we actually reach the top for this specific compiler. So what did we show? We show that this fence compiler is conditionally security preserving for this combined attackers at the top of our lattice. And we are able to lift the initial security guarantees to the top. Now on to our main results. We did something similar for 6 other compilers here at the top. And we are able to show one of the top elements in our lattice, again by proving independence and safe nesting. And of course, the security of the compiler itself. Now, we also looked at 2 variants of speculative load hardening. And we can show that these can actually not be lifted to one of the top elements in our lattice. This is because these compilers are actually insecure if speculation on indirect jumps is allowed. They cannot be combined with a J in this graphics. This is what our framework allows for as well. We are able to prove that the inclusion of indirect jump speculation makes SLH insecure. So, as I said, to apply our lifting theorem, we need to prove independence and safe nesting for each of the combinations we want to lift to. However, this results in a lot of proofs you actually need to do to lift those guarantees to some element in the top of our lattice. So to reduce the proof burden, we try to be a little bit smarter. We realized that we can do better for many compilers that we investigated by exploiting the structure of the countermeasure. Namely, with respect to independence, we devised a new property called syntactic independence. Again, independence ensured that there are no bad interactions of the countermeasure with respect to the extension semantics. But for example, looking at a fence compiler, these compilers only add fence instructions into the program, which only stop speculation and do not interact in any other way with the program. So these fences really cannot interact badly with other Spectre variants or attackers. So in such cases, we say we have syntactic independence, which we achieve by just looking at the instructions that are inserted by the compiler and the instructions related to the speculative mechanism. And of course, syntactic independence implies independence. Next, for safe nesting, we try to find something similar, akin to syntactic independence. We realized that most of the compilers either stop speculation, like fences do, or capture speculation in a loop, like the red poline countermeasures do. This means that in those cases, there are actually no real actions on the speculative trace. In those cases, we have a new condition called trapped speculation. And similarly, trapped speculation implies safe nesting. And trapped speculation is actually a property of the compiler, that we can show for our fence compilers and our red polyline compilers. And with these two new conditions, we are able to greatly reduce the amount of proofs we need to do to lift compilers to stronger attackers. For example, because we proved threat speculation for these 6 compilers, for each of the combinations we want to lift these compilers to stronger attackers, we get the safe nesting property for free. We don't need to prove it for those compilers. So that's the end of my talk. So thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, feel free.
Okay. So I might have not fully understood what you're doing, but I have the impression that for each individual compiler, you lift it up to resist against more attacker. But does that imply properties about chaining those different compilers to be protected against all the attack? Okay.
That would be the next step. As you said, like there's not where here we show really that for one compiler we can lift it to a stronger attacker, right? But it's not that we have like compiler composition.
Okay.
And that's why we have in our conditional security preservation this statement that this program needs to be secure for this extension semantics.
Yeah.
But of course, the next step would be, right, how can you get the security for the extension semantics? Where you first compile it with a compiler for that semantics, right? By showing that this compiler is also security preserving for that extension semantics. However, composing the compilers is actually non-trivial for those security properties. And that's what we're actively working on with a colleague of mine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry. Do you expect that there are cases where the lifting works, as you have shown here, but the composition does not?
Yes. So one thing we can say is with this independence property that we have, this is actually a necessary condition for composition. So if you take 2 compilers, you don't have like this independence property for each, at least one of the extensions you want to combine with, then you cannot have compiler composition. For example, if you have a compiler that, or I can give you an example, there's a compiler that inserts return instructions into the program. However, there's this other version that like speculates on those return instructions. So where you need to add fences after return instructions, essentially. So now you have like this order problem, right? Where if you first do the compiler countermeasure, which introduces new return instructions to protect against a specific Spectre version, and then do the compiler which inserts the fences after return instructions, everything is okay. But if you do it the other way around, of course, it's not right, because you miss return instructions that are inserted by the second compiler countermeasure. And there's an actual example for this kind of case. And in this case, you wouldn't be able to prove independence.